The morning everything fell apart started with coffee, not just any coffee, the expensive kind I'd splurged on as a treat to myself, the kind that comes in a matte black bag with gold lettering and costs more than a week's worth of groceries. I'd been saving it for a special occasion, and that particular Thursday felt special enough. 6 months into running my own event planning consultancy, I had 17 clients on my roster, a growing reputation for creative conceptualization, and a feeling, warm and stubborn as a sunrise, that I was finally, actually, building something real. I poured the coffee, inhaled the rich, dark aroma, and opened my laptop to check my morning emails. By the time the cup was half empty, I had 4 cancellation notices. By the time I reached the bottom of the mug, I had 9. By the end of the day, I had 17. My name is Jerry Morris, and every single client I had walked out the door in the same 48-hour window, and every single one of them walked straight into the arms of Philip Watson and Associates. I want to be fair here, I really do, because I've been told I have a tendency to catastrophize, to cast myself as the tragic protagonist when the story is more complicated than that. But there is no complicated version of what happened. The facts are clean and brutal. Philip Watson, who had been operating a rival consultancy on the other side of the city for 3 years, launched a targeted acquisition campaign that undercut my pricing by 30% across every service category, offered each of my clients a complimentary first event with his firm, and did it all within a single business week. Surgically. Efficiently. Without a single public announcement. That's not competition. That's a demolition. I found out the full scope of it from Marcus, my only employee at the time, a 23-year-old assistant who was better at reading industry gossip than I was at literally anything administrative. He slid a printed spreadsheet across my desk with the particular energy of someone delivering terrible news they have already emotionally processed on your behalf. All 17. My voice came out flat. 16 confirmed, 1 pending. Marcus sat down. The Castellano wedding is still technically on the fence, but Clara Castellano follows Philip Watson on social media now, so, yeah, there's a specific kind of silence that settles into a small office when the business model it houses has just been executed. You can almost hear the fluorescent lights buzzing more loudly. The plant on the windowsill looks more skeletal. The motivational poster on the wall, the one with the mountain and the sunrise that I'd hung ironically but grown genuinely fond of, suddenly reads like a taunt. I sat in that silence for a long time, then I looked up Philip Watson. I'd been vaguely aware of him for a couple of years. You can't operate in the same niche market without collecting peripheral information about your competition, but I'd never actually studied him. Never felt the need to. My business had been growing steadily, my clients were loyal, and the city was big enough that our paths had rarely crossed in any direct way. He'd been background noise. A name on industry forums. A logo I'd scrolled past on a promotional email once or twice, his website loaded with the kind of confident minimalism that costs a lot of money to make look effortless. Clean white space. Sharp typography. A portfolio that covered galas, corporate retreats, charity auctions, product launches, and 3 weddings so photographically stunning that I actually felt a physical pang of something, not quite jealousy, not quite admiration, something that lived uncomfortably between the two. His headshot was in the top right corner. Dark hair, angular jaw, the kind of controlled expression that PR consultants call authoritative, and the rest of us call resting I own this room face. He looked exactly like someone who would dismantle a competitor's client roster without breaking a sweat, and probably while doing something else on a second monitor. I closed the laptop, then I opened it again and stared at the headshot for another 30 seconds before closing it a second time. What are we going to do? Marcus asked. Rebuild, I said, because it was the only word that didn't feel like surrender. We're going to rebuild. What I didn't say, what I was very carefully not saying, even internally, was that the question of how was entirely unanswered, that our operational runway at current burn rate was roughly 6 weeks, and that the prospect of making 60 cold calls to prospective new clients while nursing a wound this fresh sounded approximately as appealing as a root canal performed by someone who was also playing the harmonica. But I said rebuild, and Marcus nodded like it was a plan, and sometimes the most important thing a word can do is hold the shape of something that doesn't exist yet. The next 3 weeks were humbling in the particular way that only sustained, quiet failure can be. Not dramatic, no single catastrophic collapse, no clear villain to confront, just the low persistent friction of reaching out and being met with polite disinterest, of submitting proposals that disappeared into inboxes, of watching my savings account perform a slow, dignified descent. I took smaller clients. A retirement party for a woman named Dolores who wanted a luau theme and very strong opinions about the specific shade of orange the centerpieces needed to be. A company team-building retreat that involved 3 rounds of escape room booking, 2 venue changes, and a dietary restriction spreadsheet that gave me actual nightmares. A small product launch for a local artisan soap maker that paid 1/3 of what my old corporate clients had. I was grateful for every single one of them. Genuinely. But gratitude and stability aren't the same currency, and I was running a deficit in the one I actually needed. The industry association mixer fell on a Friday evening in the 4th week. I almost didn't go. Marcus had to physically argue me into putting on a jacket, deliver a brief speech about professional visibility and networking equity, and then stand by the door of my apartment building until I actually left. The venue was the kind of upscale hotel bar that event industry people choose specifically because choosing it says something about their taste. Warm amber lighting, a pianist playing something classical in the corner, servers circulating with glasses of white wine and small plates of food that were artful but not particularly filling. About 60 people, most of whom I recognized from years of moving through the same professional ecosystem: vendors, planners, caterers, venue managers, the occasional florist who made more money than any of us wanted to admit. I got a drink, made a circuit of the room, had 3 conversations that were pleasant and professionally useful and emotionally exhausting in the specific way of talking to people who know things have been difficult for you and are being gracious enough not to mention it directly. And then someone touched my shoulder. I turned around. Philip Watson was taller in person than his headshot suggested, which is unusual because headshots are generally taken at flattering angles. He was wearing a charcoal jacket over a deep green shirt, the collar open, the kind of put-together but not trying too hard look that takes either natural instinct or a very good stylist. His eyes were darker than I'd expected. Gray-green, the color of a lake on an overcast day. He extended his hand. Jerry Morris. It was not a question. He already knew my name. He said it the way people say names when they've been carrying them around for a while. I shook his hand, because the alternative was standing there like an idiot. Philip Watson, I was hoping I'd run into you tonight. I can't imagine why, I said, and I meant it to come out dry and controlled, and it did, mostly, except for the very slight edge underneath it that I hadn't quite managed to file off. Something flickered across his expression. Not amusement, exactly. More like recognition, like he'd heard the edge and was filing it in a specific place. I wanted to introduce myself properly. We'd been operating in the same space for long enough that it seems overdue. It does seem overdue, I agreed. Particularly given the last month. There it was. I hadn't planned to say it that directly. But it sat between us now, clear and factual. And I watched him receive it. He didn't flinch. Didn't perform surprise or offense. He met it with the same steady, measured quality that his entire presentation seemed to be built on, and said, I owe you a conversation about that. You owe me significantly more than a conversation. Yes, he said. Simply. Without argument. I know, and that single undefended acknowledgement, was the last thing I had expected him to say, and it knocked the edge out of my prepared responses and left me holding a glass of wine with nothing particularly devastating to follow it up with. I'll reach out, he said. Formally. This week. If you're open to it. I haven't decided yet. I told him, which was honest. He nodded once, and something in the nod felt like genuine respect rather than performance, and then he moved away into the crowd with the particular ease of someone entirely comfortable in every room they enter, and I stood there for a moment feeling like I'd been through something without being entirely sure what it was. Marcus texted me as I was leaving. How'd it go? I stood on the pavement outside, the night air cool against my face, and looked at the question for a moment before typing back, weird. I'll explain later. What I didn't explain, not then, not to Marcus, not quite yet to myself, was the specific quality of weird. The way the ambient anger I'd been running on for 4 weeks had developed, in the space of a 3-minute conversation, a small but persistent crack in it. The way Philip Watson's eyes had been the color of a lake on an overcast day, and I'd noticed it more than once. I walked home instead of calling a car, because I needed the cold air and the movement and the space to think. The first client came back on a Monday. Specifically, it was Daniel Okafor, who ran a mid-sized tech company and had been on my roster for 2 corporate events annually for the past year and a half. He called rather than emailing, which was unusual, and he sounded slightly awkward in a way that Daniel Okafor, who had the communication style of a man who had done extensive executive presence training, never sounded. Jerry. It's Daniel. Listen, I want to come back to your firm. For the Q4 awards dinner, I was standing in my kitchen making toast and I very nearly dropped the phone. I appreciate that, Daniel. Can I ask what prompted the change? The pause. I got a note, a handwritten note. From Watson. Saying, and I'm paraphrasing here, that he'd approached my account in a way that wasn't entirely ethical and that in good conscience he wanted to recommend me back to you. He also refunded the deposit I'd paid his firm. I sat down on the kitchen floor. Not dramatically, there just wasn't a chair close enough and my legs made a unilateral decision. He refunded your deposit, I repeated. Handwritten note, Daniel confirmed. Real stationery. Nice handwriting, actually. Surprisingly loopy for someone who seems so, controlled. I was going to say aggressive, but yes, after I got off the phone with Daniel, I called Marcus. Marcus answered with the voice of someone who had been awake for a while and had already consumed significant caffeine. Okafor's coming back, I said. What? How? Watson sent him a handwritten note. Silence on the line. Marcus, I heard you, I'm just processing. Get in line. By Thursday of that week, 4 more clients had called with variations of the same story. Same handwritten notes. Same refunded deposits. Each note slightly different in wording, apparently, personalized to each client, acknowledging the specific circumstances of how they'd been approached, but consistent in its core admission, that Philip Watson had acted in a way that was not in line with how he wanted to conduct his business, and that he was recommending they return to Jerry Morris. The notes were not an apology to me. They were written to the clients. But the effect was that each phone call that came in functioned as a kind of relay, Philip Watson's acknowledgement, transmitted through the voices of the people he'd taken from me, landing in my ear one by one like stones dropping into still water. Marcus tacked a running tally to the whiteboard in our small office. Under one column, returned. Under another, pending. By the end of the second week, 9 clients had come back. The formal email from Philip Watson arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. Subject line, overdue conversation. It was not a long email. It didn't try to be charming or elaborate. It said, in the precise way of someone who had clearly drafted and revised it multiple times to strip it down to exactly what was necessary, that he had used competitive tactics in acquiring my client roster that crossed ethical lines he now regretted crossing. That he was in the process of reaching out to each client individually and that he expected several more to contact me in the coming weeks. That he would understand entirely if I had no interest in any further communication beyond this acknowledgement, but that if I was open to it, he would value the opportunity to meet in person. He signed it, Philip Watson. No title. No company affiliation. Just the name, as if he was writing it as a person rather than a business entity. I read it 3 times. Then I hit reply and typed, Thursday at 3. Name a place. He replied within 4 minutes. The name of a small, serious coffee shop that I happened to know made exceptional espresso. Not a restaurant with the power dynamics of a business lunch. Not a bar with the loosening effects of alcohol. A coffee shop at mid-afternoon, neutral, focused, and with excellent coffee, which felt like either a coincidence or an extremely deliberate choice. I suspected it wasn't a coincidence. He was already there when I arrived, which I clocked as intentional. Arriving first removes the advantage of a late entrance and signals a certain kind of respect. He had 2 cups on the table and looked up when I walked in with the same steady, measured expression from the mixer, the one I'd been carrying around in my head for the past 2 weeks and trying not to examine too closely. I ordered for you, he said. Based on what I know about your professional reputation and what I know about coffee shops. Tell me if I got it wrong. I picked up the cup. Cortado. Strong, clean, not sweet. You didn't get it wrong, I said, and sat down. We looked at each other for a moment across the small table, and I was struck again, involuntarily, by the gray-green of his eyes and the way he held himself, not tense, not performatively relaxed, just present in a way that I found both irritating and difficult to look away from. Before you start, I said, I want you to know that I've read your email and I've received 11 phone calls in the past 2 weeks from clients you sent back. I don't need an apology. I need an explanation. He nodded. Fair. Why did you do it? The acquisition campaign. The timing of it. It was targeted. You clearly had specific information about my client roster. How? He was quiet for a moment. Not avoiding the question, thinking about how to answer it accurately. An ex-employee of yours, he said finally. Someone who left your firm 6 months ago and came to work for mine. She shared client contact information and pricing sheets. I didn't ask for them directly, but I used them. I absorbed that. The employee he was describing, I knew exactly who it was. Her name was Sophia, and she had left citing a better offer, and I had wished her well and processed the departure as a routine attrition event. It had never occurred to me that she would treat client data as portable. And when did you realize it was a problem? Immediately, he said. Which is what makes it worse, not better. I knew during the campaign that the information I was acting on was improperly obtained. I went ahead because, a pause. The first one that felt genuinely uncomfortable for him. Because I was operating at a scale where I'd started treating competitive acquisition as an abstraction. Numbers in a spreadsheet. Market share percentages. I wasn't thinking about you specifically, that's honest, I'm trying to be, and then something changed, something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but adjacent to one, brief and wry. I looked you up after the mixer. Properly. Your work. Not just the client list and the pricing sheets, the actual events you've produced, the vendor reviews, client testimonials. The way you conceptualize. The Hartwell Gala from 2 years ago, the suspended installation with the projected maps. The corporate retreat where you designed the team challenge around the company's actual product architecture. I hadn't expected him to cite specific work. The surprise of it must have shown on my face. You're genuinely good, Jerry. You build things that have ideas inside them. When I went back and looked at what I'd done to your business, I wasn't looking at a market share percentage anymore. He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. I was looking at someone I'd deliberately damaged, and the work didn't match the treatment. The coffee shop was quiet around us. Afternoon light came through the windows at a low angle, throwing warm rectangles across the wooden floor. The espresso machine hissed briefly behind the counter. The notes, I said. Handwritten. Email felt insufficient. Where did you get the stationery? It's unusually good. He blinked, apparently not having expected that specific question. My mother. She buys it for me every year and I never use it. I thought it was finally the appropriate occasion. I laughed before I could stop myself. It was small and slightly disbelieving, the kind of laugh that escapes when the world refuses to remain as bleak as you've arranged it. He looked at me when I laughed. The way he looked, attentive, almost careful, made the laughter dissolve into something quieter. 12, I said, sorry, 12 clients have called. Not 11. I got another one this morning. Lawrence Chu. He said your note used the word regrettable twice in 3 sentences. I was nervous, Philip said, and it was so plainly, unexpectedly human that I had to look at my coffee for a moment. Nervous about a note to a client, nervous about the notes in general. About whether they were enough. Whether you'd find them, I don't know. Performative. I found them effective, I said carefully. I haven't decided yet whether they were enough. That's a more generous answer than I expected. Don't get comfortable. The corner of his mouth lifted. Just slightly. And something in my chest did a thing I very sternly told it not to do. If you're still watching, make sure to subscribe. Let's see what happens next. We stayed in that coffee shop for 2 hours. Technically we'd covered the necessary ground within the first 40 minutes, but neither of us made the move to leave. We talked about the industry, about the direction it was moving, the way corporate clients had shifted post-pandemic in their expectations around experiential design, the growing tension between scalable efficiency and genuine creative differentiation. We disagreed on several points in the specific productive way of two people who respect each other's competence enough to argue properly. He had strong opinions about logistical infrastructure that I found somewhat conservative. I had creative approaches that he found, I gathered, insufficiently scalable, though he said it more diplomatically than that. At one point he pulled out a small notebook, the actual physical kind, not a phone, and wrote something down in the middle of something I was saying, and I stopped mid-sentence. Are you taking notes? I asked. He looked up. You made a good point about the vendor briefing model. I didn't want to lose it. I stared at him. You're taking notes on a conversation that started as an apology. Multi-purpose conversations are efficient. But there was something in the way he said it, the smallest trace of self-consciousness. Quickly contained, that made me think he had surprised himself slightly with the notebook gesture. What did I say? I asked. He looked down at what he'd written. Turned the notebook slightly so I could see his handwriting. Which was, as Daniel Okafor had mentioned, surprisingly loopy. When I walked out of the coffee shop into the late afternoon, the city felt different. Not better, exactly. The damage to my business had been real and the rebuilding was still very much in progress, but different. Like the story had grown a new angle I hadn't seen coming. Marcus was waiting in the office when I got back. He looked at my face and said, "You were gone 2 hours, we had a lot to cover." And, I set my bag down, hung up my jacket. He's sending 4 more clients back. He confirmed it in person. That'll put us at 16 of the 17, and the 17th, the Castellano wedding. He said Clara Castellano specifically told him she wanted to stay with his firm, and he didn't feel it was right to push her in a different direction since she'd made the choice without pressure. Marcus considered this. That's actually kind of principled, annoyingly, yes. So what happens now? I sat down at my desk. Outside the window, the city was doing its early evening thing, the shift in light, the slight uptick in noise, the sense of the day pivoting towards something different. Now we work, I said. And we see what comes next. What I did not say to Marcus, because it was too new and too uncertain and had the texture of something that needed to be held carefully before it was spoken out loud, that for the first time in 6 weeks, the tight, cold feeling in the center of my chest had loosened. Just slightly. Just enough to let something else in. The next thing that happened was an email that did not contain an apology. It arrived on a Saturday morning. Philip was apparently someone who worked Saturdays, which felt like information about him, and it had a PDF attached. The PDF was a proposal document. Not for a client. It was structured like a business proposal, but the subject line read, Collaboration, Preliminary Concept. I opened the PDF while still in bed, still holding my phone with the kind of early morning coordination that implies genuine curiosity overriding basic physical dignity. The document was 32 pages. It outlined a co-production model for a specific type of event, large-scale cultural installations that bridged the corporate and the artistic, the kind of project that required both the creative conceptual approach my firm was known for and the logistical and financial infrastructure that his firm had built. It cited specific market gaps. It included financial projections. It referenced, in the introduction, the conversation we'd had at the coffee shop about vendor briefing models and creative differentiation. On page 7, there was a note in the margin, an actual handwritten margin note on a PDF, which meant he had printed it, written on it, and scanned it back in, which was so deliberately analog in an era when you could simply annotate a PDF digitally that I sat up in bed and looked at it for a long moment. The note said, "This only works if you actually want to do it, not as an obligation. Don't say yes out of courtesy." I read the whole 32 pages, then I typed back, "This is surprisingly good. I have notes. When are you free this week?" His response came in 11 minutes, "Any morning. You choose." The meeting started on a Tuesday and continued through the following 3 weeks with a regularity that felt both professional and, in some quality I couldn't quite name, like something else. We met in coffee shops, in his office, once in mine when he came to review a venue floor plan I had pinned to the wall. He brought his loopy handwriting notebook. I brought my color-coded project folders, which he examined with the expression of someone who found them both excessive and admirable. He was precise, thorough, sometimes infuriating in the particular way of someone who asks the right question at the wrong moment and makes you realize you've been building on an untested assumption. Once, we had an argument about budget allocation that lasted 45 minutes and ended with both of us being right about different aspects of the same problem. Which is the most productive and least satisfying kind of resolution? He had a habit of going very still when he was thinking, not checking his phone, not filling silence, just going still with the quality of someone who had made peace with quiet. I noticed it more than I should have. I noticed a lot of things more than I should have, the way he organized his desk in exactly the kind of geometric order that suggested a mind that found chaos physically uncomfortable, the way he drank tea in the afternoons instead of the coffee I'd assumed was his constant fuel, the way he smiled, which he did rarely and briefly and with the slightly surprised quality of someone who doesn't always know it's happening. 14 clients had now returned to my roster. Lawrence Chu had brought a referral. The Dolores Luau had generated an unexpected recommendation. Things were moving, and yet, there was a weight to the work I was doing with Philip that was separate from the business logic of it, and I had been managing it with varying degrees of success by keeping my attention firmly on the professional plane and not, absolutely not, examining the moments when his hand passed close to mine over a document spread across a table, or the way 3 hours of working side by side in comfortable silence felt more natural than it had any right to. The thing about building something with a person is that it creates a specific kind of intimacy, not personal necessarily, but real. You learn how someone thinks by working with them. You learn their patterns and their blind spots and the specific character of their attention. And learning Philip Watson that way, through the architecture of his ideas, the precision of his planning, the unexpected places where his certainty dropped and he'd look at something and say, simply, I don't know, what do you think, was doing something to the story I'd been telling myself about him. The story had been, he was a rival who had damaged my business and was now making restitution. Clean, bounded, professionally manageable, the story was becoming something I didn't yet have a clean name for. The shift happened on a Thursday evening when we were working late in his office. We'd been finalizing the proposal for the Mercer Foundation Commission, a major cultural installation for a centenary gala, the kind of project that the collaboration proposal had been built around in theory and was now real in practice. It was detailed work, the kind that requires sustained attention and benefits from 2 sets of eyes working through every element. His office was quiet, the city dark outside the large windows, the overhead lights replaced somewhere around 9 o'clock by the warmer glow of the desk lamp. We were sitting close. The floor plan was spread between us on his work table. Our chairs pulled adjacent rather than opposite. I was pointing to the entry sequence I'd redesigned, a progression of spatial experiences before the main installation space, building anticipation through scale, and he was listening with that particular quality of focused attention he had, and then I looked up and he was closer than I'd calibrated. He didn't move back, I didn't move back. For a moment we were just 2 people in a lamplit room with a blueprint between us, and the professional architecture of the entire preceding month was very present and also, suddenly, very insufficient to account for what was actually happening. Jerry, he said, and the way he said my name, not the way he'd said it at the mixer. A name he'd been carrying around, but something different, lower, more careful, did something to the floor of my resolve. Don't, I said. He went still. Don't what, specifically? Don't do whatever you're about to do while we're in the middle of work. A pause. That's a conditional don't, not an absolute one. I'm aware of the distinction. So after the work. It was not a question. My heart was doing something undignified. Philip, I'm not going to pretend I haven't been thinking about it, he said, with the flat precision he applied to everything, except this was not a budget projection or a vendor brief, and the precision of it, applied here, was somehow the most undoing thing. I don't think it would be honest, and we've had enough of the other kind of start. I looked at him. The desk lamp made the gray-green of his eyes warmer. His hands were resting on the table, close to the blueprint, not touching me, very carefully not touching me, which was somehow more pointed than if he had been. After the work, I said. He nodded once. And turned back to the floor plan. We worked for another hour. Finished the entry sequence. Resolved the lighting brief. Packed up the blueprints with the same careful professionalism that had characterized every meeting before this one, and the whole time the air in the room was different in a way that both of us were very consciously not commenting on. When we were done, he closed his notebook. Capped his pen. Looked at me. After the work, I said. He almost smiled, that brief, slightly surprised version. You remembered. I have a good memory. We walked out of the building together and stood on the pavement in the cool night, the city doing its late evening ambient noise around us. And I thought about 6 weeks ago when I'd been standing on a different pavement after a different encounter with him, and my feelings had been very much simpler and I had been, in retrospect, significantly more comfortable. Walk with me, I said. We walked. Not toward anything particular, just through the city at night, the two of us, talking about things that were not the Mercer Foundation and not the collaboration proposal and not the history between us. He told me about growing up in a house full of noise, 4 brothers, a mother who cooked for an army as a default setting, and how the precision and order of his professional life was something he'd built deliberately against that backdrop. I told him about my own opposite history, an only child, quiet house, parents who were present but contained, and how I'd spent years learning to fill space rather than wait for it. That makes sense in your work, he said. The installations. You design experience into empty space, and you design the space to hold it. He looked at me. Yes. Exactly. We stopped at a bridge. Not dramatic, just a pedestrian bridge over a canal, nothing cinematic about it, just the ordinary nighttime reality of a city in motion below us. We stood there with our elbows on the railing and the night air doing its patient thing around us. I need to ask you something, I said. Ask. The notes to the clients. Were they, did you calculate them? As a strategy for getting back into my good graces specifically, he was quiet long enough that I knew he was taking the question seriously and not just manufacturing a flattering answer. No, he said. They were about the clients. Making right with the people I'd actually wronged in a transactional sense. The fact that they also affected how you saw me was, another pause. A consequence I hoped for. But I wrote them because I owed them, not to engineer a particular outcome with you, and the collaboration proposal, that was partly strategic, he admitted. You're the best creative conceptualizer in the city, and the Mercer Foundation Commission was on the horizon and I'd already burned one bridge with you. Strategy, yes. But also, I wanted a reason to be in the same room as you again. The canal moved quietly below us. That's both things at once, I said. Most things are. I turned to look at him. He was already looking at me, and his expression had lost the controlled professional quality and was something more exposed, the same underlying person but without the management layer, and it was the most honest face I'd seen him wear. You took everything from me, I said. Not with heat. Just naming the truth, yes, and then you gave it back, tried to. Most of it, and then you showed up in my work and my thinking and I stopped. Your what? My sense of what the next part of my life looks like. He straightened up from the railing. Turned to face me fully. Jerry, this is probably a terrible idea, probably, he agreed, and reached out and tucked a strand of hair back from my forehead with the kind of careful deliberateness that suggested he had been thinking about doing exactly that for some time. I caught his wrist. Not to stop him. Just to hold it there, his hand at the side of my face, the night air and the quiet canal and the entirely improbable situation of being here with the person who had, 6 weeks ago, been the architect of my professional devastation. One condition, I said, name it, no more handwritten notes to other people about me. Anything you need to say to me. You say to me. Something changed in his face, that brief, surprised almost smile, but fuller this time, more visible, the kind of smile he didn't seem to have full control over. Agreed, he said, and then the distance between us, which had been maintained with such careful professional diligence for weeks and weeks, closed. Here is the thing about starting something with someone who has already seen the worst of what they can be toward you. There is no illusion phase. No carefully curated first impression sustained past a certain point. The architecture of the thing you're building is visible from the beginning, and you're building it on ground that has already been broken and turned. It is, in its own strange way, more honest than anything that starts in uncomplicated warmth. We were not easy on each other. That's the first thing I'd say. We were good together, genuinely, productively, in ways that surprised me, but we were not easy. Philip had very definite ideas about how things should work and so did I, and the overlap between our definite ideas was not always seamless. We argued. About work, first, but also about other things, about priorities and communication styles and the specific tax that his tendency toward controlled distance levied on me when I wanted to reach him and he had retreated into himself. He had walls. Not the dramatic kind that announce themselves, just a steady, quiet management of what he let out and when. I came to understand it as the thing he'd built against the noise of his childhood and had continued building long past the point of necessity, because that's what we do with our defenses, we maintain them past their useful life because we've forgotten how to evaluate the threat level from the inside. I told him this once, directly, the way I tend to do things when I've decided they need saying. He looked at me for a long moment. You spend a lot of time thinking about my architecture, it's professionally relevant. I design spatial experience. You're a spatial problem, that's either romantic or alarming, hold both, he did. That was the thing about Philip, when you gave him something real, he held it. He didn't deflect or diminish. He received it and sat with it and came back with something equally real, even if it took him longer to find it. The Mercer Foundation Commission was awarded to us jointly in the 9th week of our collaboration, which was also the 4th week of whatever we were to each other. The email came in on a Monday morning and I saw it first, sitting in the corner of the office that had become mine in his space. I'd started keeping things there, a folder, a coffee mug, the kind of slow territorial occupation that happens without formal negotiation, and I read it twice to make sure it was what it said it was. He came in from a call and I turned around and he read my face. We got it, he said, we got it. He sat down on the edge of his desk. He didn't say anything for a moment. He had the particular stillness of someone receiving good news that they've been wanting more than they've admitted. Philip, I said. He looked up. I crossed the room and kissed him and he received that the way he received everything real, fully, without management, his hand coming up to the back of my head with a certainty that matched none of his usual careful pacing. When we stopped, he was still holding on. We're going to fight about the installation, he said, extensively, and the budget, multiple times. And you're going to redesign something I've already finalized and call it an improvement, because it will be. And then I'll be annoyed and you'll be smug and we'll end up at the coffee shop, where you already know what I'm going to order. He laughed. Actually laughed, warm and genuine, the kind that's different from the brief surprised ones. This one had length to it. Had ease in it, had something that sounded like relief. I pressed my forehead to his. I'm still annoyed at you about the 17 clients, I told him. Just so we're clear, 16. The Castellano wedding was her choice, 16, then. I'm still annoyed, I know. His thumb traced the edge of my jaw. I'm going to spend a considerable amount of time making it worth your while. That's an ambitious promise. I specialize in ambitious. You specialize in stealing, I said, but I was smiling. I also specialize in returning what I've taken, he said. Quietly. With interest, Clara Castellano got married in early autumn. We weren't involved in the wedding, she'd stayed with Philip's firm. As he'd told me she would, and I'd made my peace with it. Marcus had made a joke about it being the one that got away and I'd thrown a pen at him with affection, but she called me 3 weeks after the wedding, Mr. Morris. You don't know me, but I know who you are, I said. Congratulations on your wedding, a pause. Thank you. I wanted to, this might sound strange. But I heard about everything. What happened with your firm, and with Mr. Watson. And I stayed with his firm for the wedding because honestly the planner there was wonderful and I didn't want to disrupt everything when it was already moving. But, my company is having a product launch in February. And I'd like to come to you for it. If you have space, I leaned back in my chair. Outside the window of the office, our office now, Though we still argued about what to call it, the autumn light was doing something beautiful to the city. We have space, I said, all 17. In the end, all 17, there's a version of this story that's about business. About competition and restitution and the mechanics of how a damaged professional relationship gets repaired and then rebuilt into something new. That version is also true. The Mercer Foundation installation opened in the spring to considerable attention, 2 full-page spreads in industry publications, a feature story that focused specifically on the co-production model we developed. Several inquiries from organizations who wanted to know if we'd consider applying the same approach to their events. The collaboration worked. The business logic held, but the version I think about when I'm making coffee on a Sunday morning, the expensive kind, the kind that comes in a matte black bag with gold lettering, and Philip is sitting at the kitchen table with his loopy handwriting notebook and a cup of tea, working through something in the slow deliberate way he works through everything, is not the business version. It's the version where I turned around at a mixer and found someone who had already been carrying my name. Where an apology arrived in handwriting that a mother had bought the stationery for. Transmitted through the voices of people I'd thought were gone for good. Where a 3-minute conversation cracked the clean architecture of my anger and left something more complicated in its place, and I chose to walk toward the complicated thing rather than away from it. The version where I learned that Philip Watson, the most controlled person in any room, goes completely still when he's thinking, makes tea in the afternoons, maintains walls he built too long ago to remember the original reason for, laughs with the slight surprise of someone who didn't know it was coming, and received my annoyance and my attention and, eventually, my genuine affection with the same quality he brought to everything, fully. Precisely, without management, the version where the worst thing that happened to my business was also, by a route I would never have predicted, the beginning of the best thing that happened to me. He looks up from his notebook sometimes, across the kitchen table, with that brief almost smile. I pour the coffee. The matte black bag with the gold lettering is no longer saved for special occasions. Every Sunday morning is special enough. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe, comment down your favorite part of the story. And if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, hit that join button right below the video. Even one member genuinely means the world to me. See you in the next one.